Hello, amazing entrepreneur. It's Tash Corbin here, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. This is episode number 224, which means that all the relevant links and show notes from today's episode can be found at tashcorbin.com/224. In today's episode, I'm going to be answering the question, are webinars dead? And I've got some surprising stats that will tell a different story. So let's dive in. I'm Tash Corbin, and this is the Heart Centered Business Podcast. Now, it's no secret that I love and adore webinars. In fact, in the last episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast, I answered Mel Gorry's questions about webinars and professed my undying love for them. And I have another podcast episode as well where I talk about why I love webinars so much. So I'll make sure I link to both of those episodes with the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/224. So first and foremost, before we jump into whether webinars are dead or not, they're totally not, I want to make sure that we're clear on what a webinar actually is. So a webinar is a web-based seminar, and I want to be 100% clear, I don't care what you call it. So you might call it a masterclass or a seminar or a online training or a webinar, whatever you like to call it, workshop, it's totally up to you. The key things that make a webinar, in my opinion, are that number one, it's free. Number two, it's live. So whether you present over slides or you present face to camera or you have lots of people answering and asking questions and you do it Q&A style, I don't care, but it's live and people register beforehand with their email. So that would be the three things that make a webinar in the context of what I'm talking about in this episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. So hopefully we're on the same page there. If you've got any questions about that, of course, go into the Heart Centered group, #podcast and say, episode 224, what about this? Is that a webinar? What about if I do it this way? Is that still a webinar? Totally ask me your questions. I will keep an eye out for them. Now, regardless of what you call them, webinars are brilliant and they have many far-reaching impacts in your business. They help you to grow your presence online and create momentum because you're online promoting them. They help you grow your list because people are giving their email in order to register for the webinar. It's a high connection strategy and they're very high conversion. But I wanted to talk through some specific statistics that help me to realize and understand that even though there are lots of very facetious people out there saying webinars are totally dead, webinars are not dead. And if you buy into that belief that webinars are dead without giving them a go for your own business, then you may just be missing out on one of the most effective tools to grow your audience, your list, and your income in your business. So according to the Digital Marketing Organization, a recent survey in March 2020 found that over 73% of marketers still rate webinars as the highest converting lead magnet and one of the most powerful lead magnets for generating sales, whether that be VIP one-to-one sales or course-related sales. Furthermore, when it comes to launching a course, membership, mastermind, or group program, over 90% of people who launch still use webinars as one of their lead magnets in that launch process. So the fact that 90% of people are still using them doesn't necessarily mean that you have to and it's the best strategy for you, but I think it does give an indication of the power of the webinar and how effective it is as a launch tool, as a lead magnet, and as a way of getting in front of a large portion of your audience, helping them move forward and presenting the next logical step of working with you, whatever that might be. Now, the second statistic I want to share is the conversion statistic. And these numbers come from a range of sources, including from podcasters like Amy Porterfield, Rick Mulready, who is a Facebook ads specialist, and Jenna Kutcher, as well as Social Media Examiner. And I've put some ranges because different places quote different conversion rates for different lead magnets and things like that. So I'm going to give you some ranges of conversion. But the conversion rate from a static lead magnet, like an ebook, checklist, pre-recorded video, something along those lines, into people buying a group program, course, membership, mastermind, The average industry conversion rate for a static lead magnet is between 0.5% and 1%. So to get one sale, you're going to need 100 to 200 people signing up for that lead magnet. The second group or cluster that I found was challenges. So 5-day challenge, 7-day challenge, 30-day challenge. And the average conversion rate from a challenge into a paid product or service with no ads supporting the conversion was 1 to 2%. And with ads was around 3%, 2 to 3% with ads. So the ads that I'm talking about there are when you do ads that put, for people who've signed up for your challenge, you actually use ads to make sure that they're watching the challenge videos. So when you're using those ads with that type of strategy, you can increase the conversion from a challenge into buying a group course or membership, mastermind, those sorts of things. Now, the interesting information that I've seen on all the challenge-based launching training that I've seen is that most marketers and most people who teach launching recommend if you run a challenge, you also run a webinar, because a lot of people don't complete challenges. Completion rates of 5-day challenges or even longer challenges, it gets even lower and lower, are right down. So the average completion rate of a 5-day challenge is under 5%. So that means under 5% of the people who signed up for the challenge actually do all of the days. So that's why a lot of marketers recommend that you want to capture in all the people who signed up for the challenge, and that's the people who did it and actually didn't complete it, and run a webinar so that they're at least moving forward in some way, shape, or form, even if they don't finish that challenge. People more readily sign up for a challenge, but they don't actually complete it to the extent that they complete a webinar. Now, this is where it gets really juicy, because if the completion rate of a challenge is less than 5%, what do you think the completion rate of a webinar is? Well, if we include people who come live as well as people who watch the recording, completion rates of webinars are still around 50%. 25% of people who sign up for a webinar show up live, and 25% of people who sign up for a webinar watch the recording. So that's 50% of the people who sign up for that lead magnet actually watch it, actually complete it. That is really powerful connection time, and it really shows when it comes to conversion rates. So I've seen industry averages for webinars be between 3 to 7%. Being quoted in different spaces by different marketing gurus. Myself, I've had webinars that have converted between 3 and I think my highest was about 14.5% conversion. So that is up to 14.5% of people who sign up for the webinar end up buying the thing that I'm promoting. Now, my 14% conversion rates have mostly been on products and services that are under $1,000. My best conversion rate for the takeoff program, which is $1,995, was 11%. But 11% conversion on a webinar, I'm really still very pleased with. And it says to me that webinars are still a really amazing strategy for bringing people in and educating them about what it's like to work with you and presenting an offer that may be a right fit for them. Now, I've seen women in the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs Facebook community, and particularly women that I've been working with through the Takeoff program and VIP, who talk about webinar conversion rates up to 21%. Now, 21% is the highest I've seen. I'm willing to hear from you if you've had a better conversion rate on a webinar. But for me, this is really powerful, because what it says is that you don't need to get thousands of people registered for something in order for it to actually work, in order for it to create a really big return on investment for your business. So that is some really juicy stats for you to think about when it comes to growing your audience, getting those sales in the door, and also the level of lead generation you need to do in order to get the sales that you want to get in your business. Now, the final stat that I want to share with you, it's a little bit outside the box, and maybe you might think this is a counterpoint to the fact that webinars aren't dead. And this stat actually comes from Facebook ads, and that is that of all of the gated styles of ads that you could run, where people click on a link and then they go and sign up for something, on a Facebook ad, webinars are the most expensive leads. Webinar leads are the most expensive. So it's cheaper to get a lead for a challenge. It's cheaper to get a lead for a static freebie. It is cheaper to get a lead for someone to sign up for a free video series. webinar leads are the most expensive out of all of the freebie lead magnet type ads that you can do. And yet, if we link back to the first stat that I shared, 73% of digital marketers still use webinars and 90% of launchers still use them as well. So even though they are the most expensive type of lead you can generate through ads, they are still being used by 90% of people launching. To me, all of that math adds up to say that there is no way that webinars are dead, and I would really encourage you to experiment and play with webinars as part of your strategy before you decide you don't want to do them. I say to the ladies in the Takeoff program that they're absolutely free to have a business model that doesn't include webinars once they've done a webinar, because the fear of doing webinars and the imposter syndrome and all of the mindset wobbles that come up is often worse than the process of actually just doing the webinar. So I really do encourage you to give it a go. Remember, everything's a practice. Make sure you come over to the show notes of today's episode, and I'll share some other episodes where I can help you with your webinars as well over at tashcorbin.com/224. Now, the final thought I want to leave you with is actually a thought that I discovered from a very well-known, but I will leave unnamed, launch specialist. And previously in his launch training, he has been very clear that running a video series, like a 3-part video series or a 4-part video series, is what he thinks is the best way of launching courses, memberships, and digital products. And last year, for the first time ever, I heard him say, people really value connection, and running your webinars live and having a live webinar as a lead magnet is actually probably something that's a bit non-negotiable these days, because people need to feel a sense of connection to you. Now, this guy had previously been flogging software and launch strategies that said, just pre-record your webinar and pretend that it's live. I totally hate that strategy. And even he is saying, you know what, it's worth it to show up live, because if people are asking questions on your fake live webinar and you're not answering their questions, then that's going to be a disconnecting thing for them, and they may actually be convinced not to buy from you because they're not being seen by you. Whereas you're better off to just run it live, answer people's questions, help people to feel seen, and create that connection with them. To which I say, hallelujah, welcome to the world of the Lady Posse, because that is what we do in the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs community. And we know that connection maximizes conversion. Now, I have a really juicy resource for you. And it's a bit of an invitation for you to be a nosy Parker and unpick my webinar strategy. So if you've been listening to this and thinking, you know what, it's time for me to run a webinar, I'm going to do it, I'm going to really look into how I can do this effectively for my business, then at any time you can go to tashcorbin.com/webinar, and my next webinar will be up there on that page for you to register for. And what I want to invite you to do is go and register it, not to get the content of that webinar, although if it's interesting to you, that's a bonus, but actually to look at the process. So have a look at that webinar sign-up page and the type of language and messaging that I use. Look at the emails that you get before the webinar goes live. Look at the structure of the webinar. Look at the follow-up process that I use for the webinar as well. I love signing up to other people's webinars to see how they do it and how I'm treated through the sales process and how they make me feel. And I want to invite you to do that as well. Just take a little bit of a nosy Parker look around at the way that I facilitate webinars, because you might be surprised if you've only ever been to those really salesy, really aggressive, like 45 case study, weaved through the content types of webinars. You might be surprised at how amazingly connecting and effective webinars can be, and how little you need to resort to the trickery and the spammy tactics and the fear and the pressure and that you have to buy before the end of the webinar stuff. I don't do any of that in my webinars, and yet I often exceed industry averages of conversion. and like sometimes get 3 and 4 times the conversion rates that industry standards say that you should get for webinars. So I really want to role model for you that you don't need to use those fear-based marketing strategies, and to tell you and show you that you can absolutely run a really connecting, really empowering, really heart-centered webinar. You don't have to dial up the fear and the pain points. You don't have to do any of those things for webinars to work as a strategy in your business. In fact, I'm finding by using empowering strategies, really heart-based strategies, and not using any of those fear and gross tactics, that my webinars are converting even better. So go and check it out if you want to. All of the links will be over at tashcorbin.com/224. And I would love for you to come and check out my webinar through the lens of how does she do it? What types of things does she say? What's the structure that she uses? And how can that help you with your webinar strategy as well? Now, as always, come on over to the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs Facebook group. Use #podcastAha. If you've had a light bulb, if you want to make a commitment to doing a webinar, or if you've got any follow-up questions, let me know you've been listening to episode number 224. Post your question or your comment, and we will continue the conversation over in the group. Until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. Bye for now. Would you like more tips, tools, and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.